Well, thank you so much, Senator, for the invitation to join you. Thank you to the leadership of the committee for your focus on this. It's really hard to imagine an issue that is more important to the education of our kids, to accessing health care, to economic competitiveness, job creation, than expanding the build out of high-speed internet. So I really want to commend you in particular for your leadership on this. I know you've been working on a number of bills that would help accelerate this. And it takes this type of effort here. It takes partnerships and discussions among stakeholders at the federal, state, and local level to get the job done. I think as the Congressman indicated, this is an issue in Pennsylvania and across the country where for too long we had too many communities that were left behind. They were left on the wrong side of the digital divide. The Congressman talked about sort of heavy-handed utility-style regulation, and he's exactly right. When we look back at 2015, 2016, we were really headed in the wrong direction. Everyone, I think, is exactly right on the importance and the value of high-speed internet, and so we tend to think of it as other things that are very important like utilities, and it is correct in the sense of the value and importance of it. It is not correct in terms of how you regulate it from a heavy-handed perspective. At the end of the day, we want competition for internet, we want choice, we want to incentivize investment, and monopoly-style, utility-style regulations are all designed to do a very different thing, which is to regulate one, right? You don't have competition, you don't have choice for utilities. That's why you need heavy-handed regulation. For internet, we want competition, we want choice. We think that's the best path forward. So we have to create an environment that's going to incentivize massive investment. When I look at the steps we've been taking at the FCC over the last couple of years, our number one priority has been closing the digital divide. And it really paid off over the last 6 months or so when you look at obviously the most important issue we're facing right now as a country, which is our response to COVID-19. As lockdown and stay-in-place orders spread across the country, in an instant, all of our lives moved onto the internet, more so than ever before. Whether it's for educating our kids, accessing telehealth, working remotely, our internet infrastructure went through a sudden and surprise stress test. We saw internet traffic spike up to 30% on networks, which may not sound that much in the abstract, but when you plan for network traffic, we're talking about overnight going traffic levels that internet providers didn't think they would see for a year and a half or 2 years. So that gradual spike that they're used to seeing in growth in traffic accelerated virtually overnight. And the great news is America's internet infrastructure held up under that sudden strain. And our counterparts in many other parts of the world weren't so lucky. They saw similar increases in traffic, and they saw significant degradation in the quality and performance of their network. In Europe, regulators asked Netflix and other streaming providers to degrade the quality of their service because they were afraid that the capacity demands on the networks were going to result in their internet infrastructure essentially collapsing. We didn't have that issue in the US. Our networks performed during the pandemic very well, and in fact, on the mobile wireless side, internet speeds in the US actually increased. So in addition to the networks performing very well, one of the things that we immediately did at the FCC was work on expanding Americans' access to telehealth. We stood up in a matter of days from when Congress passed the CARES Act, an emergency COVID-19 telehealth program. And stepping back, one of the things that we've seen in telehealth is not just needing high-speed internet connections to brick-and-mortar hospitals, but now you have a range of what we call connected care options, which are applications right on your smartphone, video visits you can do with a doctor or psychiatrist right from your home. So we wanted to support that trend in telehealth, not just high-speed connections at hospital, but the high-speed connection you need at your home, particularly with stay-at-home orders, to access quality care. And the way we describe it is we talk about it as the healthcare equivalent of shifting from Blockbuster Video to Netflix. You don't have to go to a brick-and-mortar facility to receive care. So we stood up this emergency COVID-19 telehealth program. It was $200 million. We awarded money to almost every state in the country. Pennsylvania in particular had 34 awardees that won funding from that program, totaling nearly $10 million, about $9 million, which I think was one of the largest total fundings for a state that we had in the country. In fact, I'll be visiting later today with the Pittsburgh Medical Center's Harrisburg Hospital, which was one of the recipients of that program, to see how they're putting it to use. The FCC did a number of other steps during COVID-19. We added more spectrum to the marketplace where needed. We waived lifeline rules so low-income Americans could stay connected, and we enabled providers to give away free hotspots. Stepping back from that more broadly, our efforts to close the digital divide focus on sort of 2 or 3 main areas. One is infrastructure. At the end of the day, building out high-speed internet is construction projects. It's turning dirt. And again, back in 2015 and 2016, it cost too much to build internet infrastructure in this country. It took too long in terms of permitting and approvals. And so we went to work at the federal level. We addressed some of the federal environmental and historic preservation laws that maybe they made sense for large 200-300-foot towers. But they didn't make sense for the small cells and other next-gen infrastructure we need for 5G and other high-speed connections. So we modernized some of that. We also took a look at some of the state and local processes. We had a lot of small-town mayors across this country that said, we want high-speed internet here, but it's slow coming to us because it oftentimes costs too much to build out in large must-serve cities like San Francisco or San Jose, and that sucks up the capital needed to build out to our communities. So we built on some state and local ideas and put some guardrails in place so that you don't have exorbitant fees in big cities and people provide the up or down on permits on a timely basis. And we've seen a massive acceleration in infrastructure builds since taking that action. When you combine it with our work on net neutrality, where we eliminated heavy-handed rules, when you look at the permitting red tape we've cut, internet speeds in this country are now about double where they were at the end of 2016. Internet providers on the wireless side invested $29 billion in their networks just last year. That was a record high. They invest about 70% more in their networks than their counterparts in Europe, again, driven in large part by a very different regulatory regime, much more heavy-handed in Europe. We had more miles of high-speed fiber built out in this country last year than ever before. So I think we've turned the corner in the sense we're making progress, but we shouldn't kid ourselves and try to fly the mission accomplished flag at this point. There's still too many homes and small businesses that don't have service. One other initiative that we're working on right now is called the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. In Pennsylvania alone, we've identified 190,000 premises, homes, and small businesses that have absolutely no internet service today. And we are allocating up to $700 million over 10 years to incentivize providers to build out to those 190,000 locations. We're going to do what we call a reverse auction, and it's going to start at the end of this month. We have other funding mechanisms that we're working on as well. And I think that boils down to the key. Infrastructure, we got to make sure that scarce dollars are actually going into the ground, building out, not lining the pockets of big cities or otherwise getting caught in needless red tape delays. And we need to make sure the funding is there, because while we cut red tape and that helps, to truly close the digital divide, we need to incentivize providers to build in parts of this country where there's never going to be a business case. It can cost $30,000 to run a mile of fiber. When you talk about parts of this country that have 1 or fewer people per square mile, the private sector is never going to get a sufficient return on investment to do that. That's why this universal service fund, where this rural digital opportunity funding is coming from, is so important. And the Senator and I talked briefly about mapping before this as well. We had an outdated approach, frankly, at the federal level that didn't let us accurately target funding. Our maps counted an entire census tract or census area as covered. If one person could get service, didn't even have service, could get service at some point in the future. We're now scrapping that approach and going to a much more granular effort. And one other thought I want to lead with you is workforce. We could hire about 20,000 more tower techs alone to complete this country's 5G build. And there's a shortage of these skilled workers, not just tower climbers, but linemen and other trade workers that build out internet infrastructure. So I've looked at a 5G jobs initiative that leans on community colleges as pipelines for moving workers into this space. And so we got to work on all of that. We got to push more spectrum out there, which we're doing at the FCC, cut red tape on infrastructure, make sure our funding is oriented towards areas that truly have no service, and then make sure we have the workforce. But again, we're making progress. 5G right now is live here in Harrisburg. I think that's a far better measure of the progress we're making than the first time 5G was live in New York or San Francisco, but there's a lot more work to do to fully bridge the digital divide, and I look forward to continuing to work in partnership with all of you until we really do get this job fully done.